and we'll hand over to our speakers. So the mission and vision statement for NDCC is to renew and inspire collective consciousness and community development through intentional engagement that builds sustainable power in Black communities. So our vision is to fully engage Black-led community development organizations in the conscious rebuilding and restoration of Black undersourced and disinvested communities through creating transformational paradigm shifts in community development. And the guiding principles for NDCC, the Network for Developing Conscious Communities, seeks to foster the conscious development of Indigenous community development, where spiritual principles are strongly rooted in development projects and in our leadership. At the core of our work is the practice of sharing the knowledge of spiritual principles to create positive attitudes, to eliminate any negative self-beliefs, and really to develop a collective of community minds. So some of the work that NDCC has been doing in our community development programs, we have the Ella Baker's Women's Business Center, which is really for supporting Black women's entrepreneurship. We have the Black Co-opnomics Academy, which is really supporting Black cooperative development. We have small business workshops. We have affordable housing developments, really to help Black community development. And for our upcoming events, we have the leadership business workshop that we're doing, Leadership Unlock Your Potential. It's on Friday, the 25th of October from 12 to 2. And our business analyst for NDCC, Diana Brown, will be speaking on that. And so, yeah, please make sure to join us. We'll share the registration. Registration is now open for the leadership workshop. And we also have the spring session of the Black Co-opnomics Academy from March 6th to March 8th, 2025. And that's really on Black co-op development, really looking at the history of Black cooperative movement, leadership in Black co-op movements, how racial equity affects co-ops. And it's a really interesting workshop. It's a series of workshops really to get to know Black co-op. So I'll make sure to share the link for both registrations in the chat as well. And just to go over some rules for the webinar is being recorded. We'll make sure to share the recording on our YouTube channel. Please make sure to mute your microphone unless you're speaking. We have the chat function for relevant questions and comments. If you're speaking, please try to keep it brief to respect everyone's time, because everyone has questions. So we really want to make sure that we're able to get to everyone's questions, and really allow the presenters to manage their time and follow their agenda. And please make sure not to record any part of the webinar, since we will be sharing it on our YouTube channel where you can access it. And please make sure to follow us on all of our social media so you can stay up to date with our upcoming programs. I'll go ahead and introduce our speakers for tonight. We have Capri Jones. Capri entered the housing industry as a leasing agent. Capri currently works as assistant community manager for Riverton Community Housing. Riverton's mission is to deliver quality housing where residents have a collaborative voice in decisions that shape their living experience and create stronger communities, all at an affordable price. Capri is furthering the mission by providing a great community for Riverton's members. And our second speaker for tonight is Gunnar. Gunnar Carlson is the Community Engagement Manager for Riverton Community Housing. He holds an MPA from the Humphrey School of Public Affairs. He currently works with 7 cooperative boards to improve their members' quality of life through good governance and intentional community caretaking. He also spends time in advancing housing policy goals to benefit the larger cooperative community. Thank you, both of you, for joining us tonight. I'll hand over the conversation to you, and if you want to add anything to your bio that might have missed, so our audience is really looking forward to hearing from you guys.
I think I'm good. Capri, did you have anything you wanted to add?
No, thank you so much for the introduction. That was great.
All right, I'll just go ahead and share the screen and get us going here. If I can. Let's see if I... Wonderful. You seeing the screen there?
Yeah, we can see your screen.
Wonderful. All right. Well, welcome everybody to this intro to housing cooperatives. Capri and I are just going to take a walk through and start from the very basics of housing cooperatives. We're going to begin with a little bit of history of the place that we work at, Riverton Community Housing. We're located in Minneapolis, Minnesota. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the area, we are off-campus housing. And so we're in the Dinkytown area of Minneapolis, right next to the University of Minnesota Twin Cities campus. And we provide housing through 7 different properties. And each of those properties has its own cooperative community inhabiting that property.
So just a brief introduction of Riverton Community Housing. It origins from or origins of from 1945 when they returned from when the students, I should say, of the University of Minnesota returned from the World War II, which they were set to create an exclusive community to serve the needs of the students, which is something interesting. After the World War II, there was actually like not too much food going around as far as like the disruption of agriculture and stuff like that for everybody being gone. So it was certain shortages in certain areas. So this kind of fit what they were going for when the students were coming back. So they created the Chateau Co-op Dining Club, which kind of like started everything. The dining club was a place for inexpensive meals, socializing, and studying. And the student run venture was so successful they purchased their building for this club in 1953. And that remained a dining club for the next 20 years. So that's how it kind of got started. As far as their mission and goals, it was all about food and how it was important for the community to kind of gap that what was going on after the war. So Riverton Community Housing the 20 years, after the 20 years, the Chateau Co-op Dining Club was becoming just obsolete with the changing market forces due to the affordable meal options that just became more abundant. Again, that thing that was going around like in the country, they were aware of the food desert, you can say. I know that's actually not really appropriate, but food just food what would you say anyways, they were not doing good with food across America, so more programs was actually being implemented through the government. So with that being more abundant through the other communities, and also the Interstate 35W was being built, which was changing the commute behavior in that area. So that lead the focus to kind of focus on another purpose, which was that student board for the Chateau Co-op Dining decided to get into housing in around like 1972 to meet the most pressing needs at the time. So the board worked with multiple public and private partners to secure funding and development the project. And the Chateau Community Housing Associated was incorporated as a 501c3, aka a nonprofit. And then a low interest HUD loan was used to finance the project. So those students basically rally together, lobby together to get this loan funded, a loan that was created specifically for them to get this building started and what would you call build up, and then the first students were able to move in 1973. So 18 years later, Riverton, or excuse me, I keep saying Riverton because that's the company I work for, but excuse me. In 1991, a separate entity was formed. The Chateau Student Housing Cooperative was for the purpose of becoming a leasehold cooperative. So that basically means that the co-op that was dined in, they kind of separated themselves to make sure that the co-op members and the cooperative board can rent from this leasehold cooperative, which we will get into more. So this arrangement allowed the co-op to homestead the property and lower the tax burden, and the Chateau Community Housing Association continued to own and manage the property. So a couple of years later, the Chateau Community Housing Association officially changed its name to Riverton Community Housing, the place I keep saying. So over the next decade, Riverton purchased 4 more buildings in the area to increase the amount of affordable student housing. And in 2014, Riverton broke ground on its first new building, forming a new cooperative, which was the 4th Street Housing Cooperative. And then in 2019, Riverton broke ground on its latest development, which is the Brook Avenue Cooperative.
Awesome.
So there we go, going off to Gunner.
Wonderful. And so just to recap off what Capri was just saying and expand a little bit, when she says that they were able to get a HUD loan that had never been secured before, it's never existed again. And I just want to reiterate, this is a group of students that did this. And so they begged, borrowed, and I don't know, maybe they stole a couple things to get this project done, right? They were able to find an architect, the architect of this building, the main building where we are actually right now, where my office is, the Chateau Student Housing Cooperative. At the time, they needed an architect to design the building. They couldn't really afford a lot. They didn't know what to do, so they went out there and they found one of the most prominent African-American architects in the Midwest. At the time, African-American architects were not getting the opportunity to do large projects like this much. So when they approached him and offered him this building, he just felt like he couldn't say no. We were lucky enough, we had our 50th anniversary recently, and his son was able to come and tour the property and look around and tell us some stories of his dad, and was able to recall how proud his dad was and how excited and happy he was when he got the ability to do this project. Now, in my mind, it's a brutalist building and it's not my favorite design, but that's neither here nor there. But to get into this, so what is a housing cooperative? So a housing cooperative is formed when some people join together, and it really is about a democratic basis to own or control the housing situation and related facilities in which they live. And you do that usually by forming a nonprofit cooperative corporation. So you are forming a type of nonprofit. In this sense, it is a cooperative. All members pay their equal or fair share of the expenses, and that is decided how that is determined by the cooperative. So that could just be 100%, everybody pays an equal share to join. In housing situations, you're usually going to find that it is based off of the amount of the property you have in your personal dwelling space. So there will be different amounts for different size apartments or different size homes if you're dealing with that. And all of the operating costs, the mortgage, the master lease, and the taxes, everything is rolled into there in the expenses end. And then all members will sign a membership agreement and agree to some bylaws. Again, those are all decided by the community, and the community is going to include all of the community norms and expectations in those agreements. And so there are different types of housing cooperatives when we talk about. The type that we work with here at Riverton Community Housing are leasehold cooperatives. And what that means is that the cooperative owns their community and has a lease with another entity that actually owns the property. And they work together through some of these documents and these legal arrangements that we're going to be talking about more as we go on. Leasehold cooperatives could either be with, as in our situation, where a nonprofit owns the properties and then the cooperative is in business with the nonprofit, or sometimes they're just out in the regular market and finding a building owner who's willing to agree to this type of arrangement, and they can do it that way. Limited equity is going to mean that you're in a shared equity situation. Perhaps the cooperative entity is going to retain a certain percentage of ownership of the property altogether. And then the individuals who are buying into the cooperative, and you're buying a share of the cooperative, they're going to be buying that share and that price based off of the percentage that's left that they need to cover. And then the entity itself will retain some value that way. And then you also have market rate cooperatives. That's the one that most people are most familiar with when you hear about a co-op, where you're just, the market determines that rate and you're just going to get out there and pay whatever it is. But then you're probably that cooperative entity is going to be sharing all of the communal spaces, sharing the burden for all of the community costs that are related to all of the capital improvements and things. They're generally going to own their building outright then, through their purchase of their piece of the cooperative, their share. And these things can be any size, any type of dwelling. You can have a multi-unit dwelling like we have here in multifamily properties, or you could be talking about single-family home. That happens sometimes, and there are student cooperatives on other campuses where they buy single-family homes. They fill that up with a number of students, and then the cooperative will actually, as part of their mission, they will build in acquiring extra funds and saving money till they can purchase another home in the community, and then they add that into the cooperative. So they just have a bunch of single family homes. So there's different levels of equity requirements to get into all these that we'll discuss more. So a leasehold cooperative, as I had said, the co-op leases the property from a landlord or a nonprofit, and they operate the building as a cooperative. Members are going to have no ownership in the property in this instance, but it allows the property owner to retain some control over the property. And it usually serves as a transitional population. So like we serve mainly students. We also have one community that is primarily made up of East African, New Americans and immigrants who are here. It may allow for the qualification of special tax credits. This type of situation might. And if the owner wants to sell the building, the co-op usually has the first right of refusal, which would mean they would have the right to purchase at whatever price the owner has been able to find, and then convert that into, you know, the type of cooperative where the community would actually own their building as well as their community. In a limited equity cooperative, you know, the co-op regulates the price of membership shares with the goal of lowering the housing price. So this is one of the great tools of a limited equity cooperative, is that the community, the cooperative, could choose how much of the cost of the property they want to retain in community, which means that the individual burden to join the cooperative is lower. So members only have some ownership or equity in the property, and it allows the property owner again to retain some control over the property. And this is usually something that you would use a tool that's for affordable housing, and usually affordable housing towards targeted populations. So we'd be talking about low income, first time home buyers, you know, families. And this may allow as well for the qualification of special tax credits. All of this stuff that I'm talking about with allowing for tax credits and things, you would want to be sure to check your local government regulations to see. And I would be checking at both the city and state level to see what's available to you in terms of any kind of special tax credits or any kind of relief you can get in those ways. And then you have a market rate cooperative. And market rate completely determines the cost of a membership or a share in the cooperative. So members own their unit and share in the common areas. Common areas and exterior are usually controlled by the cooperative, and usually it's targeted for middle and higher income members. And these are not usually eligible for tax incentives because they are just operating in the regular market rate. So they really are treated like any other property, both in purchase and sale. And so in this instance, members still purchase a share in the cooperative, which they own, as opposed to the real estate directly. So it's important to say this: when you have a cooperative, the cooperative in a market rate cooperative, the cooperative itself, so that nonprofit cooperative entity that you formed, owns the property. Individuals who join the cooperative are actually buying a share of that nonprofit or that cooperative corporation. You're not actually buying in a traditional sense. You're not buying your apartment or buying your home. And so what you do when you need to finance this is that you're actually financing a share in the cooperative. It's a little different. You're not going to get a traditional mortgage. And if there's questions about that, we can try and go into that a little further. I'm not the greatest expert on that, but we could talk about it a bit if you want. And so here we have a graphic just to kind of show you a little bit. When we talk about this, you know, we're talking about the barrier to entry. You're always going to see that the market rate here is going to have the highest barrier to entry because you need the most amount of equity in order to get in. Whereas with a leasehold, you need a very minimal amount of equity to get in. In our situation, in our student cooperatives, it's $40 to join the cooperative. And once you join the cooperative at that $40 price, then you are eligible for all the rights and privileges of a cooperative member, which means you have the right to live in these buildings and choose, you know, which community you're going to be a part of. And that then means that you're going to have lower and more stabilized rents. You're going to have a say in the cost structure and the rent increases and all of these things. You have a lot more control over your living situation. When we get into that shared equity, it really is kind of 50-50 the whole way around, but this can shift depending on how you structure that sharing relationship. So, you know, if you're someone who is looking to develop cooperatives and you are more concerned with retaining control and protecting your property, then that may mean that you are going to want to lower the amount of control over the property that the community is going to have so that you have more control yourself. But in doing so, then maybe there are some things you need to consider giving up there. Perhaps you have to lower the barrier to entry in order to increase your control over the property, just to make it marketable and something that is appealing to a cooperative community. And then in terms of wealth building, we have the lowest amount of wealth building possible with a leasehold cooperative. There really is no opportunity to gain equity, but you also don't need to put any in. And then it just continues up again with the shared equity that's going to completely depend on how you structure the cooperative to begin with for the potential for more equity to be earned. And then in the market rate, all of this is just going to be the full potential that's possible, again, with the most chance for barriers. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Capri to talk a little bit about some cooperative principles.
All right, so the 7 cooperative principles, you're not familiar with the 7 principles, it's basically to ensure that all cooperatives remain rooted in democratic values, economic fairness, social responsibility, and a fostering a sense of belonging and shared purposes among their members. So, like we have here on the slides, voluntary membership, democratic member control, member economic participation, autonomy and independence, education and training and information, cooperation among cooperatives, and concern for the community. I just want to go over it briefly on how these kind of implement into housing cooperatives, more using examples on how we use these principles in our co-ops and with these principles and values. So with the voluntary and open membership, we in our cooperatives actually have like Gunnar mentioned earlier, have a one-time membership fee. And that is you volunteer yourself if you want to live with the co-op. So that's somewhat of a part of it. And then that is an open membership. So it's a one-time fee to kind of just solidifies your membership here and encouraging a welcome community where anyone can fit in the cooperative values. And then the democratic democratic member control. So the democratic member control in our boards are very independent per se. They have Gunnar, a great person, alongside them from our Riverton team. So our co-op boards of directors actually host orientation with their new members every 30 to 90 days. So I feel like that kind of shows their board of directors and have their members, how they direct their members, somewhat of a democratic member control. And again, that's just ensuring all members have an equal voice in the decision-making process, etc. Usually that's what it should look like, but that's how I would say ours is working. And then member economic participation. Again, I would say that really weighs into the committees our co-op boards have, and then that orientation where they're welcome to do education and training that kind of goes with P5. Education and training is when they're supposed to be introducing their co-op board and their economic participation and such. Autonomy and independence. Our boards partner up with basically Riverton and the people like the our accountant manager and AD and Gunner. Basically before we handle everything, how it should go. It's just they are collaborative with us in our decision making for the co-ops and their buildings. So I would say that is how they are gaining their autonomy and independence through us in the housing co-op world. And then educating and training information. As I mentioned earlier, they have many orientations and fun events that kind of help understanding the cooperation values that we're trying to bring or their co-op is trying to bring as far as the educating and training information. They also are given welcome package, but college students, they need to read what they want. So I'm not sure how many of those are reading those to understand the benefits of joining the cooperative in the beginning, but I'm sure those values get brought to them through their cooperative board. Cooperation among cooperatives. So our 7 co-ops actually have been collabing together quite good and having hosting events really well. Gunner again is a extreme help a part of that some most times, getting that all organized and together with the co-op boards. So it's really nice to see that our presidents from each co-op board collab and get their events ready for their members. It's fun to see. And then concern for the community. Again, the concern for the community is just engaging all our members to have some type of concern and understand the value of the cooperation through events, the committees, all that type of things is what I would say our cooperatives are pushing that concern for the community. And yeah, I think that it kind of shows in other ways how we do those things. But that's again summary brief on how our co-op uh, implements the principles into their housing co-op sector. But again, we are leasehold cooperatives at our co-op, so that it may look different at other housing co-ops.
Yeah, and so just to say, we have the cooperative and we have all these different things. And when you're dealing with housing cooperatives, it is very important that housing cooperatives need to follow fair housing laws, especially regarding protected classes. And so you can see all the protected classes that are there. And if you're somebody who works in housing already, you already know them. But it is very important. You cannot choose to self-select and create a cooperative community that would be fall in violation of this. So you cannot base your cooperative community around race, color, national origin, anything like that. You couldn't say this housing cooperative exists only to house, something or another. Now, we have housing cooperatives that are student only. That is not a protected class. So any student who fits within their definition of what a student is allowed to become a member of the cooperative and then is allowed to live in the property. We have others that are open to everyone, but that is just one of those areas where maybe a lot of times housing cooperatives that I see, they may form around like artists are very common for having housing cooperatives and may form a community that is for artists of all types to live, but they're not discriminating based on any of these protected classes. And so any non-protected class can be used as a reason to organize or select a cooperative community. Another big one that we see here in Minnesota and actually nationally a lot is senior housing. Senior housing is actually our largest housing cooperative sector in the state of Minnesota. But they are allowed to be, since age is not a protected class, they can limit and say that they are for a certain age group. I think it's usually 55 or 65 plus here in Minnesota is what you'll find a lot of them that are organized under. And so some benefits of cooperative living. We've talked about this a little bit, but just to name them and put them out here. There's affordability and stability in the housing costs and you're due to the shared cost burden for the upkeep and property maintenance expenses. A great example of that I'm going through right now. One of my communities is looking at adding, they've had some package theft issues. So they're looking at adding a one of these package locker systems. Now that is a serious investment to the tune of about $20,000. And as the community thinks about making that investment, they are thinking about how much do we want to pay of that right now, right away, and how much of that burden do we want to spread out and for how long. And so they've come to the conclusion that probably 6 or 7 years is about what they want to spread it out. It is expected that those lockers will last about 30 years. So they figure, somewhere between 25, 30 years. So they figure if 7 years of cooperative members pay for it, then they've spread that burden out enough to allow, the next 20, 25 years to benefit from their investment without it being too taxing on this. And also they need to get it paid for in a timely fashion because Riverton, working with them, is the one who has to bear the brunt of that cost, and we are the ones who will help them out by allowing that purchase to happen. So it's a good example of partnering between the nonprofit organization and the cooperative. And it's also a great example of the cooperative going, okay, how many years need to pay for this to make this seem equitable and fair for everyone and like we're doing a good thing. The potential for building equity is there. That's a great benefit in cooperative living. So, if you are in a cooperative situation where you are inserting some equity into the situation, then you have the potential for building equity yourself. An interesting and exciting thing that we are currently able to do in our leasehold, while we're not able to help build equity, there are some new partners out there now that are doing positive rent reporting. And if any of you are in housing and doing anything in even traditional housing situations, I would suggest to you that you look into this. There is a bit of a cost there, but our communities have decided that investment is worth it. I think it ends up being, I just had to figure this out, about 70 cents per member per month. And what that will do then is it will take their regular rent payment, it reports it to the credit bureaus, and they get a positive credit score. So we're going to have young people, students and others, new Americans and things, who are building a credit history now in situations where they wouldn't normally. And they're going to have that credit score then established when they leave here, and be able to take that and use it to their advantage as they move on into their next situation, whether they choose to own or rent or whatever the case may be. If they need to get a car, we all know how credit scores work. So we're hoping that they'll see some really beneficial stuff with that. There's also the tax situation, as Capri had alluded to earlier. We homestead these properties, and so for the purposes of taxes, they're treated, the cooperative members are treated as homeowners. So they don't do a certificate of rent paid for the year. They actually get a property tax statement. And, depending on their situation, they are able to, I'm sorry, Kim, if you can be a little more specific on what you would like explained again, I can run back through that. They are able to then send that in, and if they, don't make a lot of money, i.e. a lot of college students, they might get the entire tax that was reported for that unit back that year, the property tax, in a rebate. So that can be nice for them. And then they do have increased control over their property instead of renting. And so in a traditional rental situation, oh, what does it mean to homestead a property? Sure, we can talk about that a bit. Lord, if I only knew. But we'll go into it a little bit. So you get increased control versus renting. So here, the way it works is every year, Riverton, which is who we work for, the nonprofit, we have a bunch of professional property management staff, including like a CFO, like our financials person. The management crew is going to come together and they will build a budget for each property. That budget is then presented to the cooperative board. And the cooperative board then goes through a process that lasts for like a month and a half, 2 months, where they are going to be in negotiation and work with management to say, we don't want to do that much of an increase this year. Can we put off those capital improvements and lower these costs so we can bring down the amount of revenue we need so we can lower the increase in rents for the next year? They'll come together, they'll work that out, and then they're able to they'll be able to then come to some agreement that is agreeable to both the community and Riverton, so that we can properly manage these buildings and keep the buildings safe and nice for everybody into the future. And so then, you could have expanded services as well. I mean, one of those expanded services I just talked about, like positive rent reporting, that's something where the communities came together and decided that this would be a good thing. That is where there was cooperation amongst cooperatives. Quarterly, the presidents of each of our cooperatives get together and have a meeting. They were able to discuss this opportunity there, bring it back to their individual boards. All 7 boards voted and approved of adding this expense and bringing this service to their members. And so now we have this opportunity to create this financial wellness for everybody here. They also do some things sometimes where they may do shared food buying. They could be going to like one of the big Sam's Club or Costco or something, maybe buying in bulk at different places and then being able to split that up amongst the members. In some more traditional cooperative housing situations, they will actually do buying for the entire community, and then you also pay like a food contract that gets you through for the month. And those are typically very low. We have another student cooperative on campus, and I want to say that ends up being the food budget for that, when you're buying in that way, is less than a couple $100 a month for what they provide. And what they provide is most of the staples, as well as fresh fruits and vegetables every week. But there are always going to be, your rices, your grains. There is some meat, a lot of fruit and veg, healthy food that could get you by. And then if you want, you can go get more. But we all know the cost of food these days. So that's nice when you see that. It is one great way that a cooperative can leverage. I want to take this question right now. Is a co-op business entity or a social contract? I want to say yes and yes. It is both. It really is. And we're going to talk about that a bit more. There is something that is called the member agreement. And so we'll get into that a bit as we go on. And it is also, it is incorporated. they are registered as a corporation, and it is I'm going to talk a bit more about what that means in the state of Minnesota. Obviously, you have to check your local state laws to know how you incorporate in your state, but I can tell you more about how we incorporate here. There are, it's called 308 is the Minnesota statute. We're going to get into it a little bit. There's 308 A, B, and C. A and B are the traditional ways that we have been incorporating for years. And then C is new and more to come on that. We'll talk about it in a little bit here. But yes, there is a bit of both of those in there. You know, it's a social contract, and it's probably the greatest social contract that I see, because you are, you know, you are in you're all the way the governance of a co-op is set up is that, as you can see on the screen here, all members have an equal vote. And so even board members are the same as everyone else. Now, the way that we are structured here, the board makes the decisions, but every member has the right to go to every meeting. Every member has the right to join the board. Every member has the right to propose motions at any meeting. So even if you're not a board member, you most certainly could, if there's a concern in your community and something you think needs to change, you have the right to petition any of your board members at any time, who are your neighbors and people you see every day. You could also just show up to the monthly meeting. And when you're at that meeting, you could make a motion and motion for some action to happen within your community. As long as you get a second on that motion, then that motion has to be discussed, and then the board is going to have to vote on it one way or the other. So you are going to get some action off of your concern that way, and everybody is eligible to do that. So it really does create a really neat social contract. And so there's another question there about, do the students pay rent in addition to the membership fee? Yeah, they do pay monthly rent. That is how, you know, they pay the costs of operating their building. Here in our buildings, especially the one that we're in, your rent is going to be, typically we are 10 to 20% lower than the market around here for student housing. And the other benefit that we have here, especially at Chateau, our members here and the board has chosen to go all in. So you pay one fee a month. Your rent includes your internet, your cable, all your utilities. It's just one price. So you don't have to worry. The community is doing paying for the rest of that and kind of averaging that out. So the cost of operating all that other stuff is, again, a communal thing, but it allows for a little more stability in their living situation, because they don't have any fluctuation in the cost of their apartment. In Minnesota, as you can well imagine, we're just about to come into our winter season. I know for me at home, the cost of heating my home in the winter changes my utilities by probably 25 to 40%, depending on how cold it is. They don't have to worry about any of that. They just pay one straight fee all year long. Their internet's included, everything's included, and they get better pricing on all that because they're buying it at bulk. So I hope that answers that question for you. Okay, can I explain that again? The credit building. Yeah, just to go back to that real quick before we move on here. In this positive rent reporting, what ends up happening is we pay a fee, and it's paid per door. So you pay per apartment for each of the properties. But each apartment has more than, you know, one person in it, probably. Some of them are studios and ones. But so by the time we actually did the calculation on the cost for the property, it works out to being under 70 cents per unit, or per person, excuse me, per member, per month. It's a little under $12 a year per person, right? Or something like that. We're gonna say, but it ends up being really inexpensive. And so for that, they get the benefits of building their credit score. And that is where the board, they took that calculation. Again, it's a good example of what I do and what a partnership between the professional management and the cooperative boards to do some of that calculation for them and be able to come to them and say, if you make this investment, it's going to cost you less than $1 per member to be able to provide this service, which will allow your average member to, one, establish their credit score, but two, for those who already have them going, on average, they're going to improve their credit score by 40 points. Just by getting this extra reporting in there. So that's how that works. The name of the service that we're using, not to throw out a free ad for them, but I happen to like them, but it's called Esusu, ESUSU. So if anyone's looking to take a look, they're all fairly similar. And you'd have to, do your research on these different positive rent reporting organizations to see which one would be the best partner for you. But I do think that this is something that is going to be a wonderful benefit to our members. And I know that the idea of this really resonated with our cooperative boards and our cooperative members. I hope that answers the question well. And so when we get into governance, and this is real fun stuff for me, this is where Capri's gonna have to keep herself awake, but I spend all day in this. And so every cooperative has to have a set of bylaws and a board of directors made up of members of the cooperative. And they are there to maintain and enforce those bylaws. So that's what the board is there to do. And so, in some situations, the owner of the property may have appointed representatives who sit on the board. That is literally how my position comes up. I am a member of 7 different cooperative boards. I sit on every one of those boards. I am a non-voting member, but I am a member. So I do have the right, if I wanted to exercise it, to introduce motions, and to be a part of all the conversation, as well as to represent. We can get you the PowerPoint. That shouldn't be a problem. I have the opportunity to represent Riverton. So I really sit between the management and the cooperative board. I spend a lot of time in capacity building with them, but this is one of the ways that an owner of a property, if you were someone who was looking to develop a building, or you have a building and you were specifically looking to enter into a relationship with a cooperative, this is one of those ways that you ensure, if you have concerns about your property or concerns about the decisions they may be making about what to do with it, this is one of those ways that you can alleviate some of those concerns. Board size is typically going to range from like 3 to 21 members. I would just say, in my professional opinion, I don't see much need to go above 15 ever. Our largest property is 182 units. So you can imagine there's a few hundred, 500 people, 600 people there or something. There's a lot of tiny humans there. So, but there are, that board is sitting at 9 right now, and they function and operate very well. They stay in close talks with their community, and they represent their community very well. I think if they were at 21 members, they would actually be less efficient and less able to do the board governance and represent their community, because you just get so much in there. It's hard to operate and move at that point. So you want to balance between too few members, because if we're down at 3 and it's that large of a community, then you really have a very small percentage of your community being able to make decisions on things that could really affect that community for a long time, changing of bylaws, changing of policies and procedures and these kind of things, making decisions about long-term capital improvements and such. So you want to make sure you're balancing to figure out what that representation should be. But at the end of the day, I think if you're looking at something, like in that situation, it's probably 40, maybe 50 to 1 that those representatives represent. But if you think about it in terms of that, really might just be your floor in your building, that might be your floor and one more floor. It's not asking too much, I don't think, to represent that. But remember that every member can propose a motion. So anybody has the same power in there, but only that board of directors are going to vote. And then annually, the membership is going to vote in the board. So there is accountability there, and that is standard, that you're going to have what's called an annual general meeting. And at that meeting, the members of the community are going to decide who is going to be on their board for the next year. And so you want to be sure that you are, if you're building a community and you're setting up the board, you want to be sure that you are getting a good group together, and that you have people who are willing to stand for this board and serve. You're going to want to set, as part of your good governance, the board terms, and know whether that's going to be 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. You know, long-term board memberships, I would suggest are not responsive to the community. And really, you should be looking at probably 1 to 2 year terms. And then, you know, annually, you're gonna have that annual vote. And you could have something set up where I've seen some boards where just for continuity's sake, they might have 2 year terms and half of that board is up for election every year at the annual general meeting, so that there is some accountability to the community. I see we had another question come in. If Riverton is the managing entity, are they a part of the co-op? Do they have overriding control of the co-op board? Are the actual owner of the physical property? So Riverton is the actual owner of the physical property. The question of overriding control, it all depends, and we're gonna get into this some more when we talk about some other pieces here, but it all depends on which piece of the building we're talking about and what we're talking about. In terms of the cooperative community's bylaws and their rules for the community, we have no say over those. We can offer our opinion on best practices and what may suit the community better. At the end of the day, they have the right to vote in whatever rules they want, and it is our job as their property managers to manage the property in the way that they saw fit for their community. A good example of that for me would be, you know, where I've seen this tension between the two. Here at Chateau, they currently have 6-month leases for their initial lease, and then they go month to month. The community has decided that that works best for them because we have a lot of international students. And so they need more flexibility because when they're done, either you get a job in the States or you've got like 90 days to leave the country. So they do 6-month lease and it automatically rolls over into a month to month. Now, from a management perspective, that creates a lot of instability and makes it very hard to fill a building and manage a building. We would rather see that, you know, like management would say, be really nice if those were just annual leases that re-up. The community said, yeah, it probably would be for you. It wouldn't be for us. We're going to stick with 6 months. And then it was, okay, well, it used to have a 60-day notice. Management said, well, can we at least get a 90-day notice? So we have a little more time to try and refill that unit and manage it. The community said, yeah, we can agree to that. And so some changes were made that the community accepted from management to say, we'll go with a 90-day notice period. But the community rejected the idea that they were going to go to annual leases. They just didn't think that was good for them, and they didn't have to. Are we a part of the co-op? Riverton as an entity is not. Riverton is allowed in most of the co-ops to have up to two representatives. Currently, they exercise their right with one, that is me. But they could, if they wanted to, add another member to a lot of these boards. I don't know what purpose it would serve really, but that is their right. But no, Riverton is not a voting member of their co-op. When they have their annual general meetings, I am just there to observe. I am not there to vote, nor is anyone else if any staff were to be requested to be in that meeting or be there. I hope that answers your question. All right, Capri.
Probably be good if you guys can hear me. Okay, so getting started in the housing cooperative. So you need at least 4 members in most states. Again, most states. So you'll want to double check your jurisdiction and state rules about cooperatives and how many members you need. But in most states, you need 4 to register as an incorporative, the cooperative entity. And then I'll let Gunnar continue with the statute because he did some great stuff this year.
And so, as I had alluded to earlier, we have this Minnesota statute. It's 308 A, B, and C. And so this is where you're going to go to do your incorporation in Minnesota. And anyone can go look this up and see the statute. I will warn you right now, what Capri is referring to is 308 C. So 308 A and B are the traditional ways in Minnesota. 4 is different, Temi. We could get into that a little bit if you want. We'll do that in the Q&A if you want to talk about it. 308 A and B are the traditional ways that most cooperatives in Minnesota have housing cooperatives have formed. Well, cooperatives in general. 308 A and B are really agricultural and industrial cooperative incorporations. They allow you to choose your purpose, So you can state your purpose, but they really were invented. Minnesota has a lot of agricultural cooperatives, grain elevators, think about dairy cooperatives, and things for farmers to band together and get better negotiating and pricing for all of their costs to get their goods to market and to, negotiate on selling those goods. So in the past, everything that Riverton has up to this date has been formed under 308B. I believe it's B. I could be wrong, but under 308A or B. And those are, you're just basically saying we're going to form a cooperative, and it's a cooperative for the purpose of housing. It could be, for the purpose of housing and housing students, or just the purpose of housing, whatever. So this past year, we decided, actually historically, they've been trying to get a statute that would allow for the forming of specifically housing cooperatives. We felt that there was a need for this because housing cooperatives do have different needs. And there's also times where currently, if our legislature in the state wants to direct funds to help cooperatives, in the past, when that would happen, then you would find that we're competing with every single grain silo and agricultural use, which all have a lot of need in the state. Whereas, if you want to direct funds towards housing, as we currently have a big crisis with, we really needed a better, more focused tool to be able to do that. And so we set out, led by the efforts of the North Country Cooperative Foundation, to create this new statute. And so they really took the lead on this, and I was able to be a part of the working group that helped to get this through. And I'm happy to say we were able to get it passed this past year. If any of you have ever worked on legislation and know, you write your suggested language for the bill and you find someone to take it, and then off it goes and you see what gets turned in at the end. The warning I was giving you earlier, if you go look at 308C, I believe it ended up at like 114 pages or so. It's very thorough. The reason for that and the purpose of it being so long is that really we wanted to create a statute that would allow anyone in the state of Minnesota who wants to form a housing cooperative to take that statute from law, which is all readily available, and it really walks you through all the steps you need. And you could, if you wanted to, just go get that document, read it, and it's going to tell you everything you need to do to form a housing cooperative and institute good governance to at least give you a good chance of success without needing any technical assistance or anything else. Would I recommend doing that necessarily? No. But it is there, and it's an option right now. So it is there, and it is thorough. The other thing that it allows us to do is that by having 308C, anybody who incorporates under that 308C in the future, the legislature could choose to supply funding specifically to organizations that fall under that statute. In other words, we could really get some targeted funding towards housing cooperatives in the future, which is really a need and something that we're excited about and look forward to hopefully seeing happen in the future. And so here, it's just your articles of incorporation, the member agreement, as we were talking about, which is really that member agreement is between the cooperative and its members. And that's going to lay out what each of those parties have involved. The lease occupancy agreement, that's really just like a lease that you would normally have. We tend to use the language of occupancy agreement here in the cooperatives. And so that occupancy agreement is going to be decided upon between the cooperative and the managing entity, i.e. Riverton in this case. That language has come together, but then that agreement is presented to the individual, the new member that's going to be leasing. And then a master lease is what you use in a leasehold. This is where all of that stuff about who controls what in the building is laid out. That is an agreement between the cooperative and the building owner. So in the most technical sense, Riverton has one tenant in each of our buildings. One tenant, and that tenant is the co-op. And so the master lease is going to lay out your master lease payment and everything else. In the most traditional sense of a leasehold co-op, the relationship between the co-op and the building owner would be, how much do we owe you every month? All right, it'll be there by the 1st. And that's it. The building owner is not going to worry about the leasing, the property management, any of that. They may have some rules in there that say what needs to happen and how they expect that building to be maintained and all of these things, but they really don't get involved in all the rest of it. So those articles, oh, would the developer incorporate the cooperative or do the owners incorporate? Now that is interesting. So depending on how you structure this and where you want to position yourself as the developer in the relationship with the cooperative, you have the opportunity to be a part of the founding or the incorporation of the cooperative. You still need to find individuals, but members of the developers organization could be founding members of the cooperative. So you could choose some representatives from your organization who would end up being the, part of that founding group. Now, how do we do it here at Riverton and how have we done it traditionally? Traditionally, we develop a building specifically to be a cooperative. Lease up will start to happen and there'll be some marketing there. As you start bringing in, that marketing is specifically designed to say, hey, we're forming a new cooperative. Are you interested in being a part of a new cooperative? When you find those people who are interested, you're going to bring them in and they are immediately going to become a part of that founding group and you start that relationship with them. And then they are the founding entity. They are the founders of the cooperative, along with one or two representatives from Riverton. So it's going to be a partnership in that sense. And then from that day forward, after the founding, it is always the cooperative members who do all of the governance and serve on all of the boards. Now, Riverton has the benefit and the experience of having done this 7 times. And so all of those founding documents, we're going to bring those suggested to them. Riverton is a 501c3. We're a nonprofit. Sorry, I'm just looking at questions coming in as I'm talking. But we will bring those documents forward, those founding documents, and say to people, here's some bylaws that we think would be good for you. And you could use these to start, but we'll also task them. I'm going to have to ask on that if I can share those. I will find out for you and get back to you, I promise. And actually, I believe if you go on our website, riverton.org, and you go under the members section, some of that is publicly available, I believe. So you may be able to go right there and grab them.
Yes, I believe some of that, or if not, kind of in the membership handbook, because we do make that
Yeah,
publicly available.
will you check right now, Capri, if you can?
Yeah,
Will
I'll
you
double
peek
check.
if you have a chance? We'll find out for you, but I believe you might be able to grab some of that right from our website. And so, yeah, when you get to these articles of incorporation, you're just creating the legal cooperative entity. And the other interesting thing that it does is it secures your official name, which doesn't seem like that big of a deal, but believe me, when you get into creating a community, you will be surprised how much that matters to the founding community. And I bring that up to say that if you're doing this, I would ask members of the community what they want to name the cooperative before you just do it. Even if you're already pretty set on what it's going to be, it's nice to involve them from that moment. It's just a little community engagement thing and something that can help to create a stronger community from day one.
Just to add, we do have all our bylaws for all our co-ops on our website under members and forms, and then also the handbook for all the cooperatives and kind of the things they go under as far as being a member here.
So there you go. You can go grab any of that information you want. It's readily available for you.
And the member agreements are, as gonna mention, is this documents which states rights and responsibilities of members of the cooperative and obligations of the cooperatives to the members. So each of our members before signing their lease or while they're signing the lease will sign this co-op member form or member certificate is what we usually have our terminology for. And that in general summary agreement, basically it says this is a cooperative you're joining, and because you're joining the cooperative and paying your due $40 one-time fee, that you are able to live in the co-op in it, like the building of it. So it kind of explains that, and then it explains that you have to follow the bylaws of the co-op and the rules in the handbook, and those are, again, publicly available for our members to get on our website, but also it has language in there that they're able to request that, and we're supposed to give that, management is supposed to give that to them in 7 days. So, of requesting informal writing, I should say. So, um, yeah, that's the fun information that like you want to read before you sign and live into this co-op is and I always exhaust that with our members once they're here and they have like some change and they want to yell at management. I'm like, you know what? Continue live in a co-op and you can go to your co-op board and you feel empowered and all those fun things. So yeah, the member agreement kind of like structures everything from your member to have them kind of, it's another part of your lease if you were to be acting like a leasehold cooperative, just to kind of have that understanding between the members and their co-op, because we're the management entities, so like we just assist with the lease signing and stuff like that. So yeah, we're basically doing that part for the cooperatives and having those lease and making sure those they understand those terms and abiding by those terms of the co-op and bylaws and etc. So that is a membership cert you will want to have um, as you're starting up a co-op, a housing co-op, to understand the rights and responsibilities of the co-op.
The cool question here in the Q&A, and they do not sell their shares when they graduate. So the way that they're structured here in the student cooperatives is that they pay their membership fee and they get a membership certificate, and then their membership certificate is null and void when they move out of the building or lose their eligibility. And so when they're no longer students, their membership certificate is automatically null and void. But that is not something that they need to sell to another member in order to get in here. Now, something interesting that used to happen in this market much more than it does now. It used to be, so for 40, something like 47 years or 46 years, there was less than 0.5% of vacancy in the Chateau Student Housing Cooperative. Basically from the time it was founded up until COVID. It was really hard to get in here. It was not uncommon for a student to wait a year, 1 to 2 years to get a space. But what that meant is if you were someone who lived in a 4-bedroom and suddenly your situation had changed or you graduated early, you had a room that was available and you could go out there on the market and say, hey, I'm willing to transfer my lease to someone right now. I need to move out, in 2 weeks or whatever. If you want to get in here, then I want you to pay me $500 and I'll transfer you my lease. And that would happen quite regularly. There was a whole secondary market for units here. So they weren't really selling their membership share, but they were transferring their lease over, which we still allow lease transfers. We've just cleaned that process up a bit and the board has formalized it. So now if you want to do a change of occupancy, that has to go through us. The person is going to have to obviously get, pay a membership fee and join the cooperative. And they also will need to pay some fees to cover the background checks and those kind of things to make sure that they are safe for the community to be here. All right, let's get to. So then you've got some member rights and responsibilities. And so these are what Capri was talking about that you'll see listed in our documents. And so, the member rights and responsibilities are to participate in the governance. And the way you do that is you attend meetings, you vote when you're asked to do so. You want to participate as you are available, and then you want to volunteer as much as you can because you want to distribute that workload as equitably as you can across the community. Some other interesting things that you'll find in there, though, will be some of the responsibilities for members might relate to behavior. And yeah, you can see it here. Capri, you want to get into these or you want me to take this?
Yeah, I can. Here. So the member right and responsibilities, support the goals of the cooperative, adhere to the policies and procedures of the cooperative set out in organizational documents, and support the cooperative operations by using its services or contributing to the delivery of services. Learn more about cooperatives operation and organizational capacity and supporting the co-op financially. So our co-op members does these bullet points in various ways. So the responsibilities are usually split from my understanding from committees. Gunner's usually like good with doing that, assisting with the committees and stuff like that. But the committees, they also are able to receive per diems. So that kind of helps get the engagement going as far as responsibilities and rights. I think like that really moves our members actually towards wanting to do most of the stuff is the per diem credits they receive. And then yeah, so also I just wanted to add a tidbit to the agreement form. The also in our agreements, it kind of goes into how their $40 it breaks down how their $40 go into making our co-ops more affordable, still affordable, and how Riverton slash their co-ops are able to get a tax credit because they're a cooperative and stuff like that. So this membership agreement form we have with our members sign, it explains on how to receive this kind of like their dividends or how you would explain in a typical co-op world. So they have they're eligible to get a tax credit through our county, the government, as a property tax owner. That's a whole tit bill that is explained in our member agreement. And that's just basically, I think Gunnar touched on that a little bit earlier. Just basically a credit they receive for being in the unit. And because our cooperative is able to get that tax kind of deducted or lower taxes paid so that they can receive that credit back. That's usually every beginning of the year is when it's like known as far as the credit and the paperwork you receive, and then it gets distributed at the end of the year. So not sure if you all in your states have certificate of rent pays, but it's very kind of similar to that, but for homeowners in the state of Minnesota. And even though they're not homeowners, we are able to homestead our property to kind of put it. That was kind of very confusing, but we are able to homestead the property to have the units get credits instead of certificate of rent paid because we are cooperative. So that is one way they split that financial burden and stuff like that as well throughout their cooperative.
Then you get into some obligations of the cooperative. And so, the cooperative entity needs to provide adequate notice of meetings. This is one of the biggest things I run into when we're talking about good governance with these boards. They're not supposed to be having meetings in secret. It's one of the big differences, I think, between housing associations, which is something we're going to get into a bit, housing associations and cooperatives. Cooperatives by design and by rule are open to their entire membership. Now they can have special meetings, but they need to have a regular monthly meeting, and that regular monthly meeting needs to be able to be attended by everyone. Even special meetings notes, the minutes from any meeting that a cooperative board holds, should be available to the membership. You are not allowed to withhold anything from the membership. Obviously, for any of those of us who've served on boards and things, the secretary has a lot of power in the way they choose to record those minutes, but the minutes are open to everyone and the meetings are open to everyone. And then it's the cooperative's jobs to educate any member on how they can participate in everything. And so that's really incumbent upon the cooperative. It is not incumbent upon the member to figure out how to do these things. It is the cooperative's job to give them that orientation like Capri was talking about, and to offer education and engagement opportunities through signage, through different meetings, through different tablings and different abilities of people. And they should actively be informing and educating their members to allow them to be as engaged as they want to be in the cooperative. Cooperatives need to be transparent and accessible, as I said, that you have to practice due diligence and act in the best interest of the cooperative and its members. This is important. Board members cannot act in the best interest of their individual self. They need to, by rule and good governance, they need to be acting in the best interest of the cooperative and the entire membership. At times, that may be in direct odds with their individual best interests. So that can get a little tough. And then obviously there's, the financial contributions and being responsible with the finances of the organization. And then you get into the lease and occupancy agreement. And so that document is the actual rental agreement an individual member signs for their dwelling unit. And so that could be with the cooperative or the property manager who has signed a master lease. We can get into that some more in the Q&A in just a couple minutes here. I see the question about how you structure the governance of the board itself. This right here, so for Riverton, we manage these occupancy agreements. We have been given permission by all of our boards. They don't want to do it themselves. They pay us. They want it taken care of. And so we do. So we are the agent for the cooperative, but the lease is technically with the cooperative. You know, it's not with Riverton. They have a lease with their co-op. Riverton is the agent that carries that out for them. So just a little something interesting to think of. And so then, you know, the master lease is going to be that actual rental agreement between the cooperative and the property owner. And so that is what I was saying before. It just tells you the payment that the co-op needs to make to remain in control of the building. And it also will lay out any additional rights or requirements of the cooperative, such as control of common spaces. So a very specific example here is the way that Riverton does this and is most comfortable with these agreements. In all of our buildings, there are going to be communal areas and community areas for the cooperative. So again, using Chateau as an example here, the 18th floor, which is the top floor here, is a co-op space. They have a gym up there. They have a just like a community room, like they call it their lounge. And that lounge, everything that happens within those four walls is completely up to them. So if they want to change the color of the paint on the walls, they can do that. If they want to put different furniture in there, they can do that. They have a television in there. If they want to subscribe to whatever channels they want to subscribe to, they can do that. Any of those kind of things. Now, if they wanted to take walls out or put walls in, they have to come talk to Riverton. But anything that they want to do up there is completely theirs. The halls in the hallways in the, you know, on each floor where the living spaces are, they do not control those colors or that flooring. They have a say in it. So when it came time to update that, Riverton went through a process where they looked through everything and had the, you know, talked with the designers, and they picked out like 6 different options. Those 6 different options for paint, colors, and carpet were presented to the board. The board then surveyed their members and then came to some consensus, came back to Riverton and said, we like option B. That's what Riverton did. It was a nice, easy way for Riverton to have a little bit of control over it, but then to give that final choice over to the community, but it was not the community's to make until Riverton said so. It's the same thing with the lobby here where you enter the building. Anything that can be seen from the street and could actually affect the marketability of the property itself is generally going to remain in control of Riverton and the property owner. And that just seems to be a good best practice to follow. As long as you're willing to work well with your cooperative, if you are a developer, so that there is an ability for the cooperative to have some agency in those decisions as well. And with that, we're going to open it up for questions, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen so we can see some people maybe, or at least hear them well. Did that stop sharing?
Yeah.
Good.
We do already have some questions in the chat.
Yeah.
And if anyone wants to raise their hand, I could unmute them and then they could ask their question.
Cool.
That as well, but we also have the chat. And so I think there's a question asked. I don't know if you answered this before. How do you structure the governance of the board itself?
Capri, you want to take? No, she doesn't want.
So, you know.
That's me. I just feel like I've been talking too much. So how we structure the governance of the board itself. They are initially set up in a very traditional structure. You're going to choose your size, and then they have 4 executive officers. So you have your president, your vice president, your treasurer, and your secretary. The way all of our boards operate in our communities, cooperative communities operate, and this goes back again to their master lease and the way that they're set up, but they actually do have a budget that's called an education and development budget. It is based off a percentage of the rent that comes in. So built into the amount of revenue that they bring in every year, I believe it's like up to 1.5% of that revenue can come back to the cooperative to be used for education and development purposes. Now, what does that mean? They change that all the time. Sometimes that might mean throwing a great party so everybody can get to know their neighbors and just hang out and, you know, have a good time. Other times that might mean that there is a cultural event, like, you know, we have Holi coming up, and we have a lot of Indian students in a couple of our buildings, so they are planning to do an educational piece and teach their neighbors about what the significance is of this event, invite them to come be a part of the color ceremony, eat some food, and then do some rangoli and explain that and have that available there. So there's a budget they create for that to do that event. All these kind of things. During COVID and at times when people weren't working, we had a lot of food insecurity here. So they shifted a lot of that budget towards buying food and alleviating some of that food insecurity. But yeah, we generally are going to set it up to say a few simple things. You got to have a board. The board has to have an executive committee. By rule, we have 4 committees that they have to have: F&O, which is finance and operations. They have a policy committee, which is going to review all the policies and procedures of their community. They have a, what did I say, F&O policy, E&D, which is that education and development, and I'm missing one. Oh, recycling. And that is a big committee here and a big thing in all of our buildings. And so they have those 4 by rule. They could create as many as they wanted to outside of that, but we require them to have those. And then it says, the other big piece that it'll say is it'll say that they have to have a minimum of X number of board members and a maximum of X number of board members. As I said before, for us, that's generally going to go from like 3 to 12, 3 to 15, something like that.
The question was, as we work to decolonize education, community, you got the full question, Kim, or I think maybe there's part of it. Until then, there's a question: do the students sell their shares when they graduate?
Yeah, I had answered that one. No, they automatically, yeah, go away.
Shares automatically go away.
Ah, there we go. I see what you're saying. And feel free if I'm not answering your question adequately, or if we're not to raise your hand and come off mute and engage with us. I would love to have the opportunity. But as far as Indigenous knowledge around cooperative housing that we're integrating, that's sorely lacking for us. Now, I've had opportunity to engage with some organizations, Indigenous organizations from around the Twin Cities here, and we have some conversations ongoing about how this may be. I've also heard of some exciting things going on, and I think we may have some people on the call who are working on integrating different cultural touchstones and things into their cooperative principles and properties. I will say this: one of the beauties of the cooperative model is you could bring anything into it, right? While you're not able to say this community is just for Indigenous people, I think that would get challenged fairly quickly, and probably the housing law stuff may make that tricky. I don't know where you'd end up in that, but I don't know that you want to pick that fight. You most certainly could say, these are the principles that we are aligning around, and you need to be willing to agree with and engage in these principles. You could have in your cooperative rules that you must take part in, X number of ceremony every year, or be a part of X number of education around, some Indigenous knowledge and some Indigenous principles, trying to help ingrain that knowledge and those principles and that culture into the community. And anybody who would choose to do that, yeah. Oh, I would love to, yeah, I would love to learn more. You could do whatever you wanted to do to build around that and be able to make sure that the community had the values that you wanted it to have, while maybe not being able to expressly say, we're looking for this population. Especially as we know that the way the Supreme Court and others are going right now, it's getting tough out here.
I don't know if you answered this question, whether your organizations offer one-on-one consultation.
I threw my Gmail in there. If you want to reach out to me personally, if you need it quickly, I will, you can reach out to me personally and we can discuss that. If you, Riverton, the organization we work for, is working on creating a TA program. I don't know that we're there yet, but I can most certainly put you in touch with our ED and we could see if something could get worked out there.
We went to host some panels, but I added, I shared it with everyone.
Oh, there you go.
If there's any other questions or if someone wants to raise.
Can I ask, I don't want to put someone on the spot, could we get Kim Poole to come off mute and just discuss a bit about what's going on in Baltimore? If possible, if they would rather not, then.
Would you want to talk to him? Okay.
See if we can get her unmuted. We have to do that.
Oh, me, it is.
Well, there we go.
Yes, you can hear me now. Sorry,
There you
that
go.
wasn't an option on the community share. I'm in transit. I'm not able to come on camera, so sorry for not being able to look you in the eye.
Oh, you're all good.
So we're realizing that we have forgotten how to live in close proximity to each other, that cooperative housing in a world that has created social media, you have fake friends, of thousands of friends online, and you're in such close community with them, but really you haven't seen people in real life in days. You go into your cubicle, you go into your house, whatever it is, or however you were raised. And we're very individualistic, and we're living in a culture that perpetuates that through the physical built landscape. And our houses and communities are no different. And so now that we're working to build cooperative living spaces for artists in Baltimore, even though we're a city of small neighborhoods and even smaller row houses, we're so touchy and temperamental. We don't know how to share. And so we're learning best practices around conflict transformation from out of Rwanda, the Gakaka. The Gakaka is a method that we're trying to actualize and also modify for us living and creating in the diaspora. And so it's based on, I guess, an investment that you make into the community that gives you a history with the community, so that when there is an offense, you're judged holistically, also weighing in all the investments that you've made in the community prior to that offense, and that being used. Also, having the community of reminding you of who you are in the community as a personality. So you stand in the center of the circle. We love circles, and circular round things remind us of our connection to each other. And so we use that in our conflict transformation, acknowledging that conflict will happen. It's not a matter of if it'll happen, it's when, and we're going to be better because of our ability to have conflict. And that will help us to grow and expand our community, and finding ways to plan for the, I guess, conflicts before they come, so that we use them as opportunities to learn. These are some of the ways that Indigenous knowledge is showing up in how we build out our cooperative, also in how we promote it, because we've been told that bigger is better. Baltimore was originally built as a community for just over 1 million people, a bustling metropolis. And now it's suffering. There's a community economic development term called functional obsolescence. And what has happened is that our city that was small and awkward and built for just over 1 million people now has maybe around 500,000. I mean, if I said 600, that might be a push. And so you now have a lot of dilapidation and buildings that aren't being used. And I mean, we could talk about redlining and a lot of things, but basically I'm talking about the aftermath. And so what we're doing is we're targeting places in the Park Heights community, especially in our area, where we can use these smaller spaces in clever ways and change how we see change how we see value, changing our value system. So we take alleyways and we paint them with graffiti, and now that's graffiti alley. And what would have been a cutthroat place that even during the day you might not want to walk through, now it's a nice corridor for photo shoots. And changing how people see smaller spaces, even if it's in one room. So we have seating in our shared accommodation, which is already small, that's high and low, to acknowledge different cultures. Some people sit lower to the ground, and that's okay. And so the concept of the high table, and, so all these kinds of things, how we interact with our symbolic and physical landscape, it matters. And you don't realize that you're already operating out of a certain cultural paradigm until you're presented with the alternative. So you invited me to speak. I know I've said quite a bit. I have a lot more to share, but maybe we could do that in follow up at some time in the future.
Yes, indeed. I would love to. You bring up a really good point, and thank you for sharing. One of the things that when we develop a property, when we have the opportunity to build a new one, if you were to come and look at either of the two latest properties that we developed, and this is a conversation I've had with developers over the years now, when they always say, well, I want to develop a cooperative, so what do I have to do differently? And it's like, I don't know, everything. When we build, we're building for those communal spaces. Our newest properties have shared kitchens in them. Every unit has a kitchen, and you can cook in your own place, but there's also space for you to be out and cooking with everyone else, or space for the community to come together for an event. So we're going to put in, a stove and a fridge and all these things, and a big counter or something where you could gather around. And it's going to be in an area where you could host a large group. So maybe a lot of your building is going to get there and eat there. What we see in traditional market rate apartment construction, especially here in the Dinkytown area, in the Twin Cities area, and on college campuses, everything these days is about those luxury amenities that you can add. So in my mind, when I think about this, you build an apartment that looks beautiful, but it's probably really small, but it's going to look great in pictures, and it's going to look, feel good. And then you're going to add things like golf simulators, plunge pools, dog runs, all these things that the individual is going to use themselves when they choose to, and then go back into their, beautiful little apartment. That's not what we do. We build spaces for the community to come together. We have large study rooms and areas. We put in furniture that can be moved. That is by design. That room can turn into whatever they need it for that day. They're gonna be able to make things work for them for whatever they're doing. Oddly enough, one of my buildings here that has that study room, I would say that room is 50-50 study party. I mean, honestly, probably 60-40 study party. But the type of studying that happens in there, because it has giant whiteboards, there's a lot of med students who come through because they need to study collaboratively, and they have a huge space to then write notes that I can't follow. You see a lot of PhD students doing that and writing formulas. Again, that ain't me. It's over my head. But you see these spaces being used in that way. And then they have on the individual floors, they have study rooms as well that are for small groups. So they could fit 4 to 6 people probably. But then as the world has changed a little bit, what I see those being used for more is for when somebody has an individual presentation and it's in a hybrid class. So they want to leave their apartment because, you got roommates trying to do their thing and walking around you, but they can go into this space and it's almost being used like a studio. So they get set up, they give their presentation. There's already a whiteboard in there. Some of them might have a projector or something. They've turned that space into what they need now. And they're still using them together when they want to, but they're also able to use them for what the community needs it for. So I think it's important when we're developing to remember the more space you create that is versatile and open. And I know our inclination is to say, that's that room. That's what I'm building that for, but just build rooms. and then leave it for the community to decide what goes there, and allow that furniture to move, and you've done yourself and the community a whole lot of good. Capri, you bumped a question for us? All right, here we go. So, oh, the question about, yeah,
What a great question.
it is. So where, you want to talk about this a little bit, Capri?
Yeah, I'm gonna have you jump in because
That's fine.
so to answer your question, about the land trust, let me read it because I have to. Okay, so the question was, we are creating a co-op plan, if possible, for property is held if it's held as a land trust managed by a 501c3. Can a co-op be created under the umbrella of a land trust? So, that's a great question. Again, yes, Gunner, right? Like,
Well,
yes,
so
no.
here I'm going to say a
It is
couple of
tricky,
things.
very
Yes,
tricky.
I'm going to
Like,
say a couple of things. What I want to say first is, I'm not sure what state you're in, but check your state laws. Just know that we are from Minnesota. We are currently looking into this right now for creating a new shared equity model. Okay,
oh,
coming from
Hawaii.
Hawaii, yeah, just double check.
Okay.
I'll be out there to consult with you as soon as I can be. No,
Yeah.
but in all honesty, we're looking into this right now and trying to see if we can create this model, because what I see in this model is the opportunity to perhaps lower the barrier to entry while keeping the opportunity for equity and wealth building very high. And so if we can bring in a land trust, but in my mind, the land trust is an entity.
Yeah.
The co-op is a separate entity. So I think those two are going to be separate entities. And then you also have in here that it's going to be managed by a 501c3. That's much like what we're doing now. You know, Riverton exists to be the property managers for the cooperatives that founded Riverton. We are also the entity that owns the properties. And again, that was done really for tax purposes. The co-op that started us, the Chateau, they bought the first 4 properties themselves when they were students. Like in between classes, they were out running around making these deals. They acquired all that money. They did all that. They made those 4 properties happen. And then at some point, it just got too big for them to deal with. But to your question, I would think that the co-op would be a separate entity and not under the umbrella of
a land
the
trust.
land trust.
Yeah, wouldn't the land trust be
Its own
its
entity.
own thing? Yeah, its own entity. And then like a co-op could be formed to collab or partner with that land trust.
Yeah,
or
I mean, the
say,
co-op
yeah,
would exist, and the co-op could even be formed to say, we specifically inhabit, you know,
Yeah.
land. This co-op is here for the purpose of inhabiting land trust spaces and places. You could do that by design. Now, that may mean at some point, if the co-op outgrew your land trust, then maybe they need to go partner with other land trusts. But what a beautiful thing, right? If you got to the point where that cooperative is so large that one land trust is unable to support their needs, but they could then go to another land trust, or then the land trust needs to grow, and maybe you're working with the cooperative to somehow create that extra equity that the land trust needs. There's options there, but I see them as 2 separate entities, but they could be working in very close working with each other very closely. I don't know. In Minnesota, I will say this. In Minnesota, I do not believe it would be possible for the land trust to form a cooperative, because a cooperative is its own entity. You would have to incorporate the cooperative. And once you do that, it is its own thing. Does that answer the question for you? What role does the 501c3 play?
So ours play as the management property, right?
Yeah,
Or
we
the
exist.
management for managing the co-ops.
Yep, we exist as one. We're the legal entity that holds the property, and then we are the property manager.
There
And
is
so,
a land trust that's doing what you're asking in Washington State. I'm trying to look it up. I'm a part of a cooperative scholars thing, and I have a cohort buddy that's from Washington State, Tacoma, Washington. And he mentioned that I was trying to look at my notes for you, but I can't find the name unfortunately. But I'm sure if you like Google this in Washington State, equity housing co-ops, you'll find some information. But it is a co-op that is doing that currently. And it's like a whole island of it's like an island full of property. So they founded the land trust on the property, like where the properties land, and then they formed a co-op. So it's more probably information around, and it's people already doing that, but
Hello?
is that Ron?
Oh, okay. I didn't know if I just got hung
Yeah,
up.
I'm like me.
So do you recommend each property be a separate co-op? Ooh. This one, it's there's pluses and minuses to the question is, do you recommend each property be a separate co-op versus a single co-op that owns multiple properties? That is completely up to you. I will say this, P6, collaboration amongst cooperatives, principle 6, we just refer to it as P6, but so within Riverton, we encourage collaboration amongst cooperatives. They do work together on some things, and by design and by rule, the way Chateau originally set it up, there is actually I think it's 0.25% or something, but there's a certain amount of money that is raised that goes into a fund that Riverton holds. So essentially they're making a donation to Riverton, right? But there's a certain amount of money that goes into this fund that is used to further the mission of cooperative. And so really, that's kind of your seed money and thing that allows other things to happen, right? If I were starting something new, I mean, you have some options to look at things in the Madison area, I want to say. They have some student cooperatives that are individual houses where they keep acquiring houses. There is also in Iowa, and I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head, I apologize, but there is one that, oh yeah, Moo. Kim knows Moo. If you look at sorry, we're just all over in the quotes, but you could look at what they're doing and they just keep acquiring the properties. Now, I have not spoken to them specifically, but the way it looks to me is that they own them all under the umbrella of the one cooperative. And when that cooperative acquires enough equity, then they target and they acquire another property, then they fill that property. So they're just growing as a cooperative. There are benefits to doing it either way. One of the benefits I see in making them individual is that it allows for that community to best meet the needs of that immediate community. I could see an instance where, like, if all 7 of our cooperatives were one cooperative, you would need a very large cooperative board. They would be from disparate communities from different areas, and they wouldn't be able to as responsibly meet the needs of their immediate community. And so in my mind, I tend towards every community should be its own cooperative, because I think they should all have their own board and have their own control. And really for us, it's the best way to go. If Riverton was the cooperative, then, you'd have one big board and maybe you'd have a committee at each property, and then the committee's reporting into the board, but you'd be adding a level of complexity and almost creating like a federation at that point. And I don't know that is in line with, or as closely in line and in sync with the cooperative principles as it would be to just form a cooperative for each institution. Does that answer the question? Is there more you want to push me on that or ask? Just want to make sure that we're.
Thank you, Kim, that it was Moo. So I'm glad that his name rings bells and you know exactly what I was talking about. Thank you for providing the link as well.
Oh, she was at your event.
Yeah.
Okay.
I see you merging the symposium. Yeah.
I was mad I had to miss that. I was out in Lexington the week before at another conference. So
traveling through the hurricane.
Yeah, I made it back though. Do we have more questions?
I don't think so. Oh, you do. Riverton and a limited equity co-op.
You're in on the good questions. Yes, we can. We are allowed, if we, the question is, could Riverton add a limited equity co-op into the same structure? So the structure that exists is that Riverton is the property manager for cooperatives. And so like this is part of us expanding our model. We're looking into this right now. But all that would mean is that we would be managing a property that has a little different ownership structure on the other end, right? But Riverton could manage any property. We could go out and become the management company for a regular for-profit market rate thing, if that seemed to further the mission of the nonprofit. Obviously, we exist to do what we do, but I mean, you could in theory do that for anyone. Now, it would be a cooperative, so it matches our mission. And the nature of the cooperative does not change our ability to fulfill our mission as a nonprofit. So yes, by all means, not only could we do it, we would love to. And we're, currently looking into the possibility of creating that model. And really, this is where you get me on my soapbox of, and I won't take too long, I promise, but we would like to offer, the continuum of housing, as I call it. And so part of my belief is that leasehold obviously has the lowest barrier to entry and allows for us to meet the needs of the most needy in terms of housing. Those who can't afford or don't have the equity to bring to the situation to earn a lot of equity. But my idea is if we can provide that in the least expensive way possible, and we can come in 10, 20, 30% under market rate, then it is, in theory, I'm hoping that we are also able to provide some wraparound service, right, through the cooperative providing some other things to allow you then to get some financial wellness and maybe some education around that and some opportunity to then create wealth for yourself that does not revolve around real estate and home ownership. And so if we can get to that point, then all of a sudden you're in a position where maybe you have a little bit of wealth generation and you want to, take that bit of money and you want to get into a limited equity situation. So if we could offer a continuum of housing that would allow you then to remain with a trusted property manager and provider that but allow you to move into the housing situation that best fits your needs, that would be a dream come true for us. And so, yeah, there is an opportunity there where we could have a limited equity co-op, into our structure. The other beauty of that, in my mind, as I think about this, is you always have the opportunity when you talk about a land trust, and again, you have to check your local rules and laws, but with a land trust, you can decide, the land trust can decide kind of how much that land is worth. So if you buy a block and that block cost you 1.5 to buy the block, and you decide that the land was worth $1 million of it, and then there's 5 houses on there, and that's $500,000, so they're 100,000 each, or whatever you want to call it. So you get that structure set up where it's the land trust is 2/3 of the partner and you're 1/3. And then, with the land trust, you also have the ability to structure what kind of equity you're building at what rate. So maybe you come in and for the first 5 years, you're at the 1/3 equity mark. But then after 5 years, maybe that starts to increase. And you get to a point where you only had to buy in at 1/3. But then if you stay in the community and you invest of yourself in the community and make the community better for a longer time, maybe when you go to sell your property, you're 50-50 with the co-op, or maybe you're 70-30 with the land trust, right? Because the land trust needs to recoup some of that money in order to keep the properties affordable. But maybe that ratio can change. And then we're creating wealth and building wealth for people in a whole new way, and allowing them to take that then and use that as the engine to go on and do the next thing. And so that's really where I see the power of combining land trust with cooperative and then creating that continuum of housing. So when you think about it, as you grow, Riverton was founded to provide affordable housing, specifically to students, but affordable housing. That is the mission. And so the best way to do that for us is leasehold. And so then as you grow from that and you grow the mission, you have the opportunity to increase that. But we always want to keep it affordable, that needs to stay in our minds. So when we look at affordable home ownership, how can we change the game in that and make it work and make it equitable and make it worth your time so you're earning equity, maybe not at the same rate as the market, but we're also protecting you in ways you don't have protections in the open market.
If there's no other questions, go ahead and wrap up. Are there any final questions? Just one more question. So I want to thank you, Gunnar and Capri. Thank you so much for joining us today. As speakers, the conversation was really insightful, and we're really glad that everyone really benefited from this conversation. I know in the chat a lot of people are. I think there's someone's asking whether they could. Is there any way we can read more on wealth creation?
I'll see what I can find, and I can pass that along to you guys at NDCC, and maybe you can throw that out. And then I've thrown my email in there, and you can always find us over at riverton.org if you ever want to reach out to me. And we can, I love to exchange ideas and share on more, but yeah, I'll get some information out to you as I can.
Yeah, and then I just wanted to share that next week we're having our second part of the Housing Co-op webinar series, which is about the financing, the funding, really going into like the nitty-gritty, the details of housing co-op. So please make sure to join us. It'll be the same time, 6 to 8 p.m. And I'll add the link to the chat and you can go ahead and register. You will be able to join. With that said, thank you so much, Gunnar and Capri, for joining. If you have any final remarks, if you want to say anything, go ahead.
You got anything?
Thank you for having us and your time. Thank you, Gunnar, for being here. Yeah, thank you, NDCC. I appreciate the offer, and I'm glad everyone seems like they had some insightful information given to them. So hopefully we can see more co-ops, and especially housing co-ops around America and the world.
Yeah, it's good to get a chance. Thank you, NDCC, and thanks everybody for being here. Capri for being my partner in crime. Housing is a passion of mine, and I truly believe that cooperative housing is a way that we can solve some of this. I mean, this problem is huge, so we got to do everything we can. And this can be a really interesting piece for everyone to look at. Feel free to reach out to me in any of the ways. And if you need help with something, we'll find a way to make sure you get that help and make it work. So get out there and do some good.
Thanks everybody for joining us tonight. With that said, thank you everyone. Have a great night.
See you.